Welcome to School Life Unpacked, the podcast for anyone navigating the complexities of their child's education. Join me, Natasha Curtis-Ego, and a lineup of insightful guests as we explore the challenges, joys, and surprises of school life, offering support and tips to help us feel more confident and connected. Hello and welcome to School Life Unpacked with me, your host, Natasha Curtis-Ego. Today I'm joined by a wonderful guest, and if you'd like to take a moment to just introduce yourself to everyone for me, please.
Oh, hello. I'm Frank McEvoy. I'm a retired teacher of 40 years service, and I'm now a parent, a grandparent, and as a retiree I've taken up voluntarily working with a multi-academy trust.
That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about multi-academy trusts and how parents can find out a little bit more and just get a little bit of history, a little bit of information so that they can better look at how a trust runs a school and why they run a school, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you could give us a brief outline of what a trust is.
Well, it's not a mystery, really. It's just, I would call it, I suppose, a collection of schools, a group of schools that have formed together. The idea is to collaborate and support each other and to raise standards and to make sure the children are properly taught.
This is different from how schools used to be, isn't it? Because they were under local authority and based sort of funded directly from the local authorities. How is it different? And
yes, it's smaller scale, though across the country there is a trend to much larger MATs, multi-academy trusts, and it's interesting because local authorities, it was felt some years ago that local authorities had become too big, too unwieldy, maybe inefficient, maybe charging schools too much for their service, and maybe the service was quite bloated in places. And was it doing a good job? So there came a time where this was suggested and began to be adopted. So trusts tend to be smaller. It varies from 8 or 9 schools, maybe up to 30 or 35. So it could actually be described as a small local authority if you get to the larger size setups.
In our area, we have quite a few schools, and I've noticed that there are Catholic trust for Catholic schools and then other trusts for other mainstream schools. Could you explain what the difference is between, I know it's not a big difference, but there must be a little difference when it's a faith-based trust?
Yeah, so I suppose locally it's slightly weird, if I may say so, because we've got 4 grammar schools, 2 girls, 2 boys, which in the rest of the area, Essex, is not the case. There are sparsely distributed grammar schools, but there are local authority schools, state schools, as some people call them. Then there are independent or standalone academies. So a school can just be an academy. And then there are groups of schools, multi-academies, which have grouped together to collaborate and work together, as I mentioned earlier.
When you're collaborating as a multi-academy, does that serve the schools better because you share resources then? Yes? Am I correct?
Well, it's a mixture of a variety of things. Firstly, it's good to share and collaborate because you learn from each other. So when you're setting standards, you can compare notes, how you're doing. You can look at the way you work. You can serve the children better, I think, by efficiency. And of course, there's that financial model of, you could have a shared bank account, you could share costs, you can appoint one person to work across all of the schools. Okay. That seems to work very well. So there are efficiencies to be made and progress, which is usually quite positive.
So when you're a parent and you're looking at a school, is what trust the school belongs to something you should consider, or is it something that...
Right. An interesting one. As a parent, I think the best advice I could give is there's all the information you could ever want out there. So I would firstly go to the local authority website in the area in which you live, and you'll pick up electronic catalogues of all the schools listed, all their numbers, how their admission priorities and criteria, lots of information there. And also the information provided now includes how full up they are, how in demand they are. So you'll see how many people, if they apply to a school, there'll be a few sets of simple figures saying, well, how many people applied, how many people got in. So that's very useful for parents, the local authority. Then there's obviously websites. Every school in the country has a website. That is a standard expectation from the Department for Education. And each website will contain the same information or the similar information. So about admissions, about policies, about the hours they work, how many teachers they've got, and the sort of ethos the school has. So you'll see that there. So from a parent's point of view, I'd say, first of all, leave plenty of time if you're thinking about sending a child to a school, seek out the local authority information, seek out the local school information. Then, of course, the multi-academy trusts usually have their own website indicating which schools are part of their family and how they work and the sort of expectations they have.
Just basically do your research as a parent before you choose your school.
And leave plenty of time. It's amazing how much time you need to apply for, should we say, September coming up. Well, that could have come and gone because the process is quite long. You have to make choices about, for instance, you're asked to choose 3 schools in order of priority. And there are rules attached to how near you live near the schools.
Yeah, your catchment area.
Exact catchment area. So all of that, it'd be great if you could get involved in that as early as you can so that you don't feel under pressure to suddenly realise you've only got 3 days to get a form in. Otherwise, you're really going to be in trouble.
Oh, yes, definitely. And I think COVID parents would relate to this. We had to choose schools during COVID. Luckily, in my case, it was my child's first school. It was trying to get a tour and trying to see it. But because she was my first, I was completely unaware of the process. Now I've learned with my second, I knew what to do nice and early and I knew how to apply. But definitely research is so important because every school is so different. And sometimes seeing the school helps just as much as doing the physical research.
You're absolutely right, Natasha, because visiting the school actually would be the third part of that process, wouldn't it? Once you've got yourself down to the last 2 or 3 that you think, oh, this looks suitable, then the next thing you would do would be to ring them up and find a way to get in and say hello. Excuse me for asking again, how long have you been on the Board of Trusts for? I think it's 7 years. We're quite a young multi-academy trust. So I think it's 7 years now. Previous to that, I was most probably about 20 years involved in being a governor, chair of governors. And
was that fun? Did you enjoy being a governor?
Yeah, it's a lot of hard work for no pay.
Oh no, the pay is the reward of the satisfaction of making a difference.
It's just something I think some people... I've always wanted, taken an interest in how schools are run, why they're run, which is why I most probably ended up as a head as a school, not wanting to be a head, but just constantly asking questions about, so why is the timetable written like that?
So you're very good at seeing the improvements needed and how to adjust a school to get the best out of it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, over the years, you gain a lot of experience and knowledge about how to approach a problem if a school has got some issues, looking at all of those in the widest context you can, and then drilling down to see which action needs to be taken and how you can bring that to a successful conclusion.
It sounds so much fun to be able to problem solve, but to see the change as you implement these new directions of a school. Going back to being on the Board of Trusts, how many schools is part of your trust?
We're 9. We've got 1 secondary and 8 primary, and about 3,500 pupils in total, I suppose.
Oh, wow, that's so many.
Yeah, and as it's a Catholic MAT, it's 13 parishes.
Oh, that's very large.
And about 500 plus staff.
Oh,
so that's a brief. But that's not particularly big. A 9-school trust.
Is a good size.
10-school trust is what we call a medium size.
Okay. We were talking earlier, which I'd like to bring my listeners up to the fact that you treat each school individually, which sounds quite interesting. When it's a trust, you'd imagine that there's standardization. So how do you implement keeping the school individual and allowing it to thrive on its own in a way, but also keeping it underneath the umbrella of the trust ethos?
Yeah, a good question. I think the Catholic MATs in particular value the idea of obviously each child is unique in the sight of God, so that the child is very much the focus. And because of that, schools are encouraged to develop an ethos, an approach based on the gospel message. And from that, you find that schools, for instance, Catholic schools usually have either saints' names or holy people's names, and often those can act as a theme for the approach that the school takes. So if it was, I don't know, St. Joseph or St. Mary or something like that, or Mary, it would be that they might say, well, what were the values? How did they live their lives? How can we echo what's happened in their lives in the way we learn and how we work with each other? So there's a big emphasis on schools obtaining a unique approach. Now, if I use that as an example, multi-academies often say, well, we have one discipline policy.
Okay.
Well, they may have very similar discipline policies, but generally speaking, the way they build that behaviour management and expectation from the child is very much embraced in a certain way. So certain schools might have themes like respect and tolerance, listening skills and things like that. And other schools may have completely different approach. So they may have a different sort of mantra, a different idea of how do you approach it. Tolerance. So they use different words and then they build those into the way they work, both in the classroom, the way they teach, and then the way they treat the children and the way the children are expected to treat each other.
Okay, so it's that kind of having this backbone of individualness, but having that running the current of, if we're talking about Catholic schools, the faith and the teaching of the faith in the back, but allowing it to filter through to the mainstream and adapting for our everyday life so that children can relate to it in our current times.
Yes, so the values and the expectations and the standards are the same across the mat, but within each school that can be approached in a variety of unique ways.
Do you get to go and see the schools and see how they're doing and meet the children? Or are you stepped very far back?
Oh, yeah. I visit all of the schools at some stage during the year, some more than others. But that's not a reflection of the school. No. It's more maybe they may have building work going on or teacher interviews or head teacher interviews. So we appoint the heads.
That's a big responsibility.
Absolutely, yeah. So which is a very exciting thing to do. But That's the most important thing to do, most probably.
What kind of things do you look for when you're appointing a head?
Well, obviously, somebody who understands the mission of being a head and the importance and the seriousness of the job that they've got in making sure every child there obtains their true potential. But at the same time, they've got to have good organisational skills. They've got to be able to organise that timetable. They've got to be able to make good judgments about appointing staff, making good judgments and be able to get on with people, be able to manage difficult situations, be able to understand the process of everything from discipline to serving up school dinners, and be able to be practical in their approach. So it's a very wide-ranging set of skills, which normally when people apply, you'll see that where they started from and their experiences, the different schools they worked in, who they worked with, the successes they may have taken on learning projects. They may have taught different age groups. So they've got different experience. So you get somebody in the end, hopefully with a wide range of experience and skills.
Very exciting. I mean, our school had a new head recently, and it's wonderful to see how she's come in and instead of some people will come and change everything, but she hasn't done that. She's kept the core, the good things that were placed in set, and she's introducing small little changes that are really exciting. And you can see the children are excited about it because at first there was that transition period where everyone was in tears and mourning the loss of our previous head. But when our new head came in, this excitement for the new. So it's quite interesting to know what the process is of how the trusts look and find new heads for new schools.
I think it also reflects the fact that Catholic schools recognise the uniqueness of each child, but they also recognise the uniqueness of each teacher and a head teacher.
Yeah.
So, they have personalities, they have ways of doing things, they have ways of approaching, they manage change in a certain way that suits them. Very useful.
It is. It's really the impact of it's such a big change to a school, especially when you've had a head teacher for a very long time. You can see the nervousness when we hear, oh, so-and-so is retiring and everybody's like in panic. Who are we going to get? But it's such a relief when you know the new person stepping in has a vision for the school, but it's a positive one and it's not going to destroy the legacy, but actually add to it. So it's really wonderful.
Yeah, building on legacy is really vital. So whenever we look at policies across a mat, again, we say what things do we have in common? What things do we legally need to have there? But also how do we build on that to make sure that it's a positive experience and it's never a negative approach. It's always got to be something which you, as you said, build on.
I read something earlier that kind of threw me, which is that if a school goes into special measures, even it's a state school, it then automatically goes to become an academy. And so I was thinking that seems so extreme, like such a big change, but I'm assuming that change is to the betterment, the idea that an academy supports and allows that school to make changes that it needs, but in a safer environment rather than being on its own. It has that kind of internetwork, like we mentioned earlier, the idea that a MAT is there to support the schools and to take from the schools the good bits and spread that all around.
That's right. And hopefully a MAT, if it took on a school, that it would be looking at not only support mechanisms, but also the experience it has about managing, looking at trying to drill down to see what wasn't working in the school and how those things could be changed and built on, and looking at how that approach would make for, as you say, it's all about raising standards. So the conversation with the Department for Education, which every school, and I've had a few conversations on behalf of some schools, a conversation is very much like, are you competent enough and experienced enough to take on that school? What are your priorities? How are you going to raise standards? How are you going to turn things around? What time scale are you going to give to that turnaround? I mean, it can be the minimum. A brilliant job would be a year to 18 months, but the average turnaround for a school most probably would be 3 years. But they would, and they inspect that school on a termly basis. So you have Ofsted inspectors or HMIs, Her Majesty's inspectors, coming in every term to look at what has changed, what has improved, what are you doing. So they're constantly, there's constant pressure to make sure that change is efficient and properly managed.
What impact does Ofsted have on a MAT? Because Ofsted is independent, isn't it? So it goes into your schools and has a look around, and then what kind of impact does it?
If the government is the Department for Education's arm of checking standards and how schools are run, so they come in independently of the MAT and they inspect all of the. Should we say you've got 15 schools? They inspect all 15, and they suddenly find 3 require improvement. Well, that would send alarm bells, obviously, to everybody, including the MAT, thinking, well, if it was a good MAT, why didn't we know that they required improvement?
Yes.
Or they might say, well, actually, we knew that, but this is the program we've got in place to actually put things right.
Okay, so
if you class a school as inadequate, then again, the same questions get asked, but maybe slightly deeper level.
Do you find that because you know this inspection can happen at any point, that you make sure that the trust, or not you personally, but the trust makes sure that it tries to keep its standards high and therefore on its own independent, does its own kind of inspection to make sure that they're running as they should be?
Yeah, well, each MAT, even a local school, fairly small MAT of 9 or 10 schools, would have a school improvement consultant or partner who is a experienced professional who would be going into those schools, most probably on a termly basis, to see what's going on, to have a look at all the standards, asking all the right questions, and looking at where the pinch points may be for that school. It may well be that schools just had 2 resignations and a pregnancy, and therefore they're looking at the idea of, recruiting new staff or temporary staff and looking at that. So that might be the focus for that particular school. Yeah. So so the school improvement officer or partner would be looking at all of those. They'd usually be experienced heads who are most probably semi-retired or decided to move and do a different type of job. And they would enjoy going into schools and supporting. So they're a professional, critical friend, as what they call them, to support the head. Ask those questions that need to be asked, but not in a destructive or critical way, but in a supportive way, saying, well, okay, so you've got a shortage. Where do you think, what do you think needs to be done?
Okay, so basically your trust is a school's best friend. It manages you, but it is your best friend at the same time, because the idea is that it supports you in being the best school you can be.
Yes. So the MAT doesn't administer from, a good MAT doesn't administer from above. They have what they call an ELT, an executive leadership team, which actually is all the head teachers with the CEO and the CFO, the financial officer and the accounting officer. That team meets usually about every 2 weeks. It's very frequent. It used to be, let's meet every half term should we say, 10 years ago or so. And let's just ask the heads how things are getting on. But now it's very much a formation of looking at what's happening, how we can get better, what else can we do, how can we work together, how can we better collaborate, what issues may have turned up. For instance, one big issue which is affecting affecting all schools over the next 5 years or so is falling numbers. So across the country, the birth rate is dropping. Now that will trickle through as we go through, and that will mean fewer numbers coming into schools, and that will mean pressures on schools because schools are funded by the number of pupils they have. So as soon as you don't get 30 in your reception class, then you are underfunded. So if you only get 25, then you are quite well underfunded. So that is a financial issue for a school to look carefully at, and in particular for maths to looking ahead 4 or 5 years' time, looking at falling roles, mitigating that issue, and keeping a close eye on how schools are funded.
Amazingly,
so it's quite complex, really.
It is, because there's me as a parent going, well, if only there are only 25 people in the class, that's great for my child because they get more attention. But if a school is underfunded, that means the school can't afford to run.
Yes.
So it's sort of like a double-edged sword, isn't it? Of this ideal where you want smaller classes because 30 seems so large, but actually I guess it's practical and it works on the numbers because a school is a business and it has to run efficiently, even though we don't view it as parents as a business. We view it as school, something that our children have the right to be educated. They have the right to be educated to a certain standard and come out being able to be good members of society, having this, wonderful education. And we're so fortunate in the UK that we get free education, which in other countries you don't get. But if schools are underfunded, what then happens? How?
Well, I mean, the first sign that parents most probably would see, that is most probably fewer learning support assistants. They'd be the first to go. Most probably first to go, because you obviously need a qualified teacher in front of a class regardless. So, I mean, you could take the example, I think there was in the news recently about a Scottish school that had been saved. There was only 2 pupils in the class.
Oh my goodness.
It was on one of the islands, I think, and obviously the funding issue there is
extreme,
horrendous. So exceptions are made in all time when you get extreme examples like that. But it does mean the idea of that full-time teacher there not having having a support assistant and a cook and God knows what else is most probably unlikely. I don't think they asked her to cook the dinners as well, but the funding is an issue. So, and staffing is about 85% of the budget.
And then the rest is everything else.
Everything else, yeah.
So with the schools, with the trusts, do you get a pot of money that you distribute evenly, or is it area-based? As in, some areas need slightly more than others due to, I don't know, do schools pay rent? I don't really.
Very interesting question. So all schools are funded directly, as an academy, you are funded directly from the Department for Education. And it's based on your pupil numbers. Now, so that money comes in as a pot, but because you are part of a multi-academy trust, that pot in some trusts is managed centrally. So it disappears into a bigger pot, a very large pot, and then redistributed according to need for each of the schools. It's unusual. I don't particularly like the idea of a big pot because each school has since it started, managed its own budget.
Okay.
So the important thing about getting that money in each year, the school has to set a budget. It has to be a balanced budget, i.e. you've got to break even. So if you get less money in for some reason or other, lower pupil numbers, then you have less money to work with. You can't say, well, I'm keeping the same and we'll just overrun the budget. You can't set a deficit budget. So that is a big challenge. Which is why when you're looking at appointing head teachers, you are trying to find somebody who's also most probably got a good head for figures, maybe a good instinct for figures, not necessarily a finance person, but a good instinct for figures and understanding what costs the most, and if money had to be saved, where you would look to try and save it. So it's a big challenge. So those budgets come into schools. They are unique to each school. And then the MAT as a whole takes a small top slice. So, for instance, my local one takes about 2.5%, which is quite low. Some MATs might take 6 or 7%, but they then include more. What do you get for your money? So whatever the money's taken off. So a very small amount is taken off a top slice to manage the actual MAT itself. and the rest obviously stays with the school.
And then they manage their budgets themselves.
Yes. Yeah, and we help them. The MAT would help them manage that budget. So, for instance, we have a central finance office with a chief financial officer, CFO, who manages and looks at those pinch points and those areas where you need to pay attention. They will be in charge of negotiating large contracts for IT, HR, health and safety, building management, all those sorts of things. So they can say, well, we've got 3,500 pupils, and we've got, a big pot of money here. How cheap a quote can you give us for looking after all the health and safety for all those schools? Whereas previously a school would have to go off and negotiate itself. So there's kind of a reasonable amount of money to be saved for schools by centralising that process. And that's one of the good advantages of MATs. They will have centralised much of what goes on to make sure that you're getting efficient use of money.
It sounds complicated, but simple, if that makes sense. This idea that the government, we have this centralized place where we can get the help we need, but we also have to kind of manage our budgets the same on our own. It's finding a balance. And would areas, so I know that our South End area isn't very affluent in some ways. So does that affect the school?
Oh, yes. So actually schools do get additional budgets based on, it might well be areas where pupils might need extra attention or additional support. So there will be additional support grants based on need for the school, which is again looked at. I mean, that we've got, for instance, like PE grants, and I think lots of small grants given out to encourage healthy living, things like that. So they're given out and according to pupil numbers and sometimes according to need. So some schools will get larger budgets than others if they feel that pupils are struggling for one reason, economic reasons often, and that they need additional funding to help support that.
Oh, that's good to know that your school, if it needs it, can apply for certain funding to try and keep it at that level of that you hope it would be able to stay at.
I think one of the disadvantages is that they do get grants, but I think all schools would say, well, the grants don't really cover everything and they don't really cover the true need. So schools are always penny pinching or looking at that budget. It's a very tight budget. So it's not one say, oh yes, you can have another 50,000 to do X, Y, or Z. It's a case, well, this is what you're getting per pupil. Spread it out and make it work.
That sounds like a lot of pressure.
Well, yeah, it is.
I suppose that's why a lot of schools sort of encourage PTAs in some ways to help sort of not add a few frills for students and keeping that child enjoyment factor going. I mean, ours has just started and we've changed the name, and this idea that parents can help, not necessarily financially, but they can help with time to just improve. So I guess it must be where the gaps are in schools of not quite enough money to make everything be as wonderful.
There's never quite enough money, but teacher associations or parent associations do a great job. And I remember joining when my two boys first started school, and that's most probably how I got involved in a lot of the school activities. And it was to buy those extra bits and pieces. For instance, often they might say, well, look, the school library is looking a little bit out of kilter, a little bit old-fashioned. Let's try and raise £300 or £400 and let's buy some books. And they get recommendations from the teachers, and the parents then could see, oh, yes. And so the pupils directly benefit. And that's the important thing about parent fundraising, is that they can see the direct benefit. They might help subsidise the odd trip. Trips going out usually have to be, they are partially subsidised by the school, mainly funded by parents. So if you're a parent that hasn't got much income, then that's quite an issue. So schools do try and create pockets of money and ways of helping subsidising, reducing costs for those sorts of parents.
I think cost of living and everything going up, I think schools are struggling to help as much as they would love to help. And they do need the support. They sort of need more support in some ways from parents than possibly they have done in the past. Or maybe it's always been the same. It's just that I'm only experiencing it now.
Well, I mean, costs have gone up. Some costs have gone up more than others. I mean, just a school hiring a coach to take children down to swimming and back. I mean, you're talking of hundreds of pounds for a coach these days, rather than most probably something that was maybe a bit more manageable in the past. It's hard to compare, but certainly these, they're not. They are considerable costs and things you can't ignore.
If we could sum up our conversation, I feel like I've jumped all over the place, and apologies for that. But the goal of the conversation was sort of to find out what trusts do. And would you like to sum that up in a few words?
Well, I don't know whether I can do it in a few words, but the idea is to get unique schools who have a joint mission, which, for instance, Catholic schools have, to join together and collaborate so that you help raise standards, help inspire children, and help try and save costs by being more efficient. And as I mentioned earlier, all the heads getting together, spinning off those ideas. So if you look, for instance, at the websites of local schools here, or look at maybe a local MAT, you'll see that there's lots of little examples of them getting together for sports mornings, art afternoons, gatherings. So there's lots of inspiration coming from the heads when they work together, rather than the old, I wouldn't say old-fashioned, but the old view of maybe, I'm an academy on my own, I'm doing okay, so I'm all right. So those schools often, on reflection, reach out to what's happening in the other schools, and they reach out to the community and say, what else can we do? Can we get involved in planting trees or looking at the environment, things like that? And if you like, MATs are an extended version of that, a more organised version, where they've got the facilities and the opportunities to be able to do that.
It's almost like a school community for the school itself, like that kind of bringing schools together to do the best that they can and raising standards of all the schools, so all our children get a good level of education, have a great experience at their school, but allow themselves to grow into who they want to be, but have the support behind. So, your school's supported and your child's supported because the school is supported, so therefore the staff are in a better place because they have that support.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, staff happiness, one local school here got the highest rating from the Ofsted for being a happy school. I won't mention who it is, but you could look it up. And they hadn't realised that was going, and they based that on parental comments and pupil responses. Not on anything else. So it was just an interesting survey that they decided to do. And it reflects that, yes, Catholic schools actually do achieve great standards. In fact, they've got a reputation across the country for doing very well. But I think it's very much about that sort of, because they have got that central theme, and underlying a very strong underpinning of valuing both the pupils and the staff.
Yeah, no, happy staff, I think, produce happy children because they're not stressed and they're not on edge. There's this beautiful symbiotic relationship that happens between children and their teachers when their teachers are happy. Yes,
when you see a youngster coming back, shall we say they've joined reception. I remember this from my grandchildren coming back and saying, Miss X, Miss Smith or whatever it was, she is now God or goddess. She knows everything. What she says goes. And they really identify and look up to their teachers. So we've got to remember that a school is very much, that there is a close relationship between pupils and their teachers.
Yeah, you see it.
And it's a very important relationship.
Absolutely. You see it in the morning when they run up to the teachers and hug them. Yes. And that to me is really beautiful because your child is at school for so many hours. Yeah. And if they're unhappy with their teacher, that's, torture. But to see them going in and embrace them and have this little morning conversation, you feel such a relief.
And happy children learn quickly, make good progress.
Yeah.
Yeah, we know.
You would see it from your experience that, that it's mental health in small children is so vital. And it seems to be the hot topic of this transition and mental health and getting your child ready for this big change. So I think when you see the morning gate thing, it really makes you feel like, actually, my school might be doing something right because my child is very happy going in.
Yeah. and you will see progress. And you can also identify problems early. If you've got a happy child, they tend to talk, and from that, if an issue begins to arise, then you can identify it very easily. So it's a sort of win-win.
With the trust, there must be a big responsibility for safeguarding your staff, safeguarding the pupils. So is that like a policy that is written with the trust and then goes to the schools, or is it something the schools write that comes to the trust?
No, safeguarding is a bit like a stick of rock. The word safeguarding runs right the way through the middle. So yeah, I mean, all of us have to go on safeguarding courses every year, as do all the staff. Obviously, there are DBS safeguarding checks on all of us. I've got 3 DBS certificates myself, I think. You have to have an additional one if you're a trustee as well. So they try and check your background as well. So yeah, but schools each year try and eject, I suppose, an important message to all the kids that it's okay to talk to people if there's a concern that you've got to try and, if you have that happy atmosphere, then you've got much greater chance of a child becoming confident to be able to talk to an adult in a way. And as soon as that happens, then safeguarding can kick in and help support that child. And we have a very good team actually from the local authority, and they which works with Southend, Thurrock, and Essex SET, they call it, which work all together to ensure that very high safeguarding. And safeguarding is very much part of the inspection process, as you know. And you, as a school, fail instantly if anything is untoward with any of the procedures for safeguarding. Yeah, that's the first hurdle you trip over if everything wasn't absolutely spot on.
That's also good to know as a parent.
It is good to know.
Okay, so we know that the school is safe if it's doing okay in Ofsted because it would have failed.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, it's the first thing they check.
Oh, it's good to know.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for chatting with us. It's been wonderful, and I've learned a lot, and I hope so has everybody else listening, because I think it's important to know a little bit more about your school and how it's run, just so you can make informed decisions. Yeah, and I would say to parents, don't forget to get out there, use the websites, start looking around. Department for Education got their own websites, own set of standards. All the Ofsted reports are out there, as well as everything else. So, all the information's there. You learn a huge amount. Yeah. Good luck. Thank you again. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on today's episode, and we truly appreciate you listening. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, subscribe, and follow to stay updated on future episodes. We look forward to seeing you next week.